Just as powerful emotions often develop in the silent reaches of our inner selves, Kena Bridge of Spirits begins with an astonishing quiet. This muted launch into a beautiful, engrossing adventure is reflective of its story and heroine. The world of Kena is brimming with charm, and its lush landscapes encourage exploration. But all is not soft footsteps in a mossy meadow or a leisurely dip into clear waters. Harsh challenges await, and they will push players in unforgiving ways. This mirrors the unexpected tragedy that befell the small village at the center of Kena's journey. Following the titular spirit guide, our goal is to ease the suffering attached to the land and the hearts of those who once lived on it. Tales of lost loved ones and the burden of living with the choices made permeate the narrative. While Kena's surroundings are truly an artistic showcase, the overall mood I took with me after completion was of somber introspection and forgiveness. While many of its ideas won't break new ground, there's something to be said about creating a polished, gripping, and confident game that knows what it wants to be and accomplishes that goal. I highly recommend Kena Bridge of Spirits. Now, let me tell you why. Kena is what happens when a group of creators who love animations like Pixar movies and video games like The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time decide to push their talents beyond what most would expect from a fledgling studio. It has the ability to pull heartstrings with wonderful stories and carefully crafted cutscenes, but doesn't skimp when it comes to exploring shadowed forests or fighting off angered, crazed spirits. Despite having no real expectations for the title other than I wanted it to be good, Kena manages to meet and sometimes exceed my desires for a style of gaming I didn't know I missed. Whether I ran around collecting adorable critters called rot or searched for different angles to a perplexing puzzle, Kena invoked feelings of nostalgia that transported me back to a time of sitting cross-legged in front of my CRT television, discovering how to clear the water temple. There's a simplicity in its design and rhythm that makes it hard to put down, but also easy to pick back up if you haven't played for a few days. This rhythm begins when Kena enters the main hub of the world, a village abandoned hundreds of years before we arrive. Immediately, it is clear all is not well. Buildings are covered, foundation to rafters, in a menacing, thorny system of red roots. Areas that should be beaming with verdant trees, grasses, and flowers are merely patches of dirt or skeletons of long-dead flora. This village blocks the path to Spirit Mountain, which is where Kena is heading. Using her combat skills and newly acquired kawaii friends, she destroys the source of the poison for this area and brings back some balance. The transformation of this dour town into an inviting community in just a few moments is something to behold, and whenever Kena restores a troubled area, it's a treat to see grasses spring from the ground or rotten wood shine like polished oak. The contrast between muted palettes and invigorated colors shows the strength of Ember Lab's artistic vision. This vision bleeds into the CG cutscenes you'll frequently see throughout Kena's quest. Just like Kena's gameplay influences rest in a bygone era, these cinematics bring me back to playing epics like Parasite Eve, Final Fantasy VIII, or even the intro sequences from Tekken Tag Tournament and Dino Crisis. While the jump in quality from gameplay to CG cutscene isn't as stark as it was back in the day, I still found myself looking forward to the next display of eye candy. There is a charm and emotion prevalent in every scene, and that same care can be felt throughout every overgrown trail or rushing waterfall in the main game. The CG scenes transition nicely because the effort was made on both fronts. Kena will not slam you over the head with its graphical prowess like Ratchet & Clank A Rift Apart will, but it does something spectacular that a lot of studios striving for realism miss: the artist's touch. Everything in this game is uniformly leaning in the same direction. The lighting, textures, models, and animations blend into a creation bigger than the sum of its parts. Even the small details like the way grass and foliage shudder from Kena's shield blast apply additional brushstrokes to its striking painting. Because everything is cohesive in style and animation, the world comes alive in a way more realistic looking games such as Call of Duty or Far Cry sorely stumble, trip, and explode over. They want to push graphical limits so much they don't stop to think if that was the right direction to shift their AAA budget weight. Kena certainly is a gorgeous game, with a lot of characters sprinkled throughout every location visited. It reminds me of a time when the limitations of hardware fostered creative decisions. That's not to say Ember Lab isn't pushing a ton of pixels, but it does feel like the devs valued their vision more than they valued whether something looked quote-unquote real or a cutting edge. I will always appreciate that more than pushing boundaries simply to push them. In Kena's world, masks are created to symbolize the departed. These masks will eventually turn to dust, which represents the spirit moving on from the physical plane. When a spirit refuses to move on, their associated mask will remain until whatever emotions or tasks keeping them are resolved. While Kena's ultimate goal is to determine what happened to the village and ascend to the mountain shrine, she recognizes that leaving troubled spirits to wander the land is not something she can let happen. After speaking with this village's previous spirit guide, she receives the mask of the first spirit in need. Using this mask, Kena can see into the past at certain locations to uncover the truth regarding the spirit's desire to remain and potentially figure out if there's something she can do to help.
Look, a tear of the forest. It's a sign of regrowth.
This first questline is representative of the game on the whole, and the structure generally looks something like this. Traveling from the village hub into a new region, we search for what emotions and events are keeping the spirit from letting go of this world. After learning about the fears, regrets, or angers that are keeping them, we do what we can to alleviate these stresses, usually by force because video game, and then we get to wish the spirit on their way. Hence the title of the game, Kena, Bridge of Spirits. This is greatly simplified, of course, and I'll go into more detail when I discuss the story because there is some meat on these narrative bones. More succinctly, Kena will explore a dungeon or two, learn about the ailments of the spirit, fight some baddies, earn a new traversal method, and free the spirit after an awesome boss battle. This formula should seem familiar to anyone who's played a Zelda game excluding Breath of the Wild. Go to Dungeon A, get the new traversal item or ability, use said item or ability to get to Dungeon B, and start the process over. It's a tried and true progression format, and Kena leans on it quite a bit. That's not a bad thing though. I have not played a game of this style in quite a long time. There are some that come close to this formula, but Kena really feels like a modern take on a more traditional Zelda format. Even the hallmarks of that series, bow and arrow, hookshot, bombs, enemy lock-on, and environmental puzzles show up in full force. But that's not to say Kena doesn't bring new ideas to the table. While many of Kena's abilities are traditional, the introduction of the rot provides another way to solve puzzles and take out baddies. The cute fluff balls will follow Kena around like a herd of lost miniature puppies and can execute context-sensitive directions like moving an object or pulling a lever. They also play a key part in combat once the difficulty begins to ramp up, which it most definitely does. Two other neat abilities I want to highlight are the Spirit Bow and Spirit Bomb. The bow enables Kena to shoot arrows, but from an exploration perspective, the bow allows her to shoot switches and launch herself to out-of-reach areas using special blue flowers. When Kena aims the bow while in the air, time slows down and gives her the opportunity to reset her aim or traverse larger areas going from flower to flower without the need for solid ground. It's a great feeling when Kena zooms to normally unreachable areas for a tucked away secret, or when she bangs out a couple critical hits while floating gracefully through the air. As a side note, the haptic feedback in general is nothing special. However, the feedback on the bow is one of the most satisfying uses of haptics yet. It really feels like pulling back on the string, and I hope Ember Lab further takes advantage of this technology in whatever new project they have in the works. As for the bombs, I found them to be quite interesting because, beyond the expected explosions they cause, they can be used to levitate certain blocks found around the map and dungeons. These uses get more and more complicated as the game progresses, requiring more precise timing and deciding which blocks to move and when. Now that I've covered some of the tools Kena has at her disposal, let's talk about exploration in general. If I had to say one thing about exploring the village and surrounding regions, it would be this. I'm glad there isn't a map with a bunch of objective markers. Now, don't misunderstand, there is a map and it does have objectives on it. However, the map does not tell one how to get somewhere. There are no pings in the world to guide you to the next objective. There are no abilities to show you where hidden trails or items are located. The player is left to their own curiosity, and this decision benefits the player and game tremendously. Initially, the game feels linear, as forest trails don't diverge into unknown corners and there are few secrets to discover. But this changes as more and more mechanics get introduced. Gradually, the game lets the player loose to find chests tucked behind waterfalls, rot hiding in logs, or cursed chests forcing combat challenges, which I'll talk about later. At roughly the third waypoint, trails no longer exist, and instead Kena roams large open spaces with the freedom to wander as she pleases. Kena strikes a good balance of letting the player explore and develop at their own pace, while setting some limitations so the game doesn't meander for hours and hours unnecessarily. This balance not only keeps the game from overstaying its welcome, something a lot of modern games do, but keeps the narrative focused in the player's mind. Often, narrative-centered adventure games such as The Witcher 3 can lose sight of their overall goal. Playing that particular game, I completely forgot what I was supposed to be doing on multiple occasions, and all the tension in the story deflated with my wanderlust. That's not something I think the average player will experience with Kena Bridge of Spirits. This is possible despite the game providing plenty of things to do. It is quite rare to go more than a minute or two without discovering something. There might be an interesting building, or an indication that a puzzle needs to be solved, or something as simple as fighting a group of enemies. The player is constantly rewarded for taking even the smallest amount of time to check beyond the expected route. Exploring is integral to the rhythm of both the narrative and gameplay. Because there isn't a brightly colored trail on the ground telling you to go a certain direction, the player will become familiar with landmarks and breadcrumb trails that hint at disguised treasure. Having a simple objective marker on the map is more than enough to get the player moving, and it wasn't until I purposely began searching for more rot or spirit mail that I really began using the map more frequently. It was freeing in a way that's hard to describe. To play a modern action-adventure title that trusted me to find my way using context clues and my own damn eyes was more refreshing than it really should be. Oh yeah, I suppose I should mention there are a lot of collectibles to find. There are 100 rot scattered around the world, a bunch of hats for the rot to wear, statues, cursed chests, and spirit mail, the latter being the most interesting to hunt for. All of the buildings in the village proper are sealed away, and by finding and delivering spirit mail, the player often earns rewards like the ones I mentioned previously. I really enjoyed watching the community slowly recover as I brought each piece of mail back to its rightful home. I wasn't just checking items off a list, I was restoring the land and people. And that felt good. My only complaint with Kena's exploration and traversal is the final quarter of the game feels very linear compared to the rest of the game. I definitely enjoyed what Ember Lab presented, but there wasn't a whole lot to do in these final areas once the story arc wrapped up. Previous regions felt untapped and beckoned me to return to them once I freed the troubled spirit. These final parts felt more like true dungeons versus dungeons that happened to be intertwined with a larger space. Okay, I lied. I have one more complaint. Kena cannot get out of water unless there is a slope for her to walk up. Why? Why can't she grab the ledge? Many times I had to swim around for way longer than I wanted to just to find a stupid slope so I could get up. It's such a weird, annoying decision. Anyway, moving on.
Let me help you. I can heal these spirits and restore balance to the forest.
I know you're kind. You sense the power that flows through this land, but you do not fully understand it.
Let's just get this out of the way. When it comes to combat, Kena Bridge of Spirits has a bit of a difficulty problem. Combat is generally filled with easily defeated fodder and the occasional boss turn normie for good measure. However, the issue with Kena's difficulty surrounds its bosses. But before I dive into that pile of get good mentality, I want to cover how combat feels and what options are available to the player. Overall, Kena is very responsive, but her animations do have some jank to them. I found this surprising considering Ember Lab's background in animation, but I suppose controlling an interactive character is a bit different than creating a movie or short film. It is difficult to point to something in particular that causes this jank, it's just one of those you know it when you see it kind of problems. Nevertheless, I found the experience to be serviceable, bordering on pretty good in some select fights, but this isn't Devil May Cry or God of War. Players who keep their expectations in check will enjoy each encounter simply because of the variety of moves available, not necessarily any intricacies with loadouts or stringing explosive combos together. The game will not force the player to adapt to any given situation since almost any strategy will lead to victory. Kena's main mode of dispatch is whacking away with her crystal-laden staff. Basic heavy and light combos are accomplished with little effort, and unfortunately approaches don't become any more complicated than this. You won't find alternating hits, pauses for variants, or even launchers. Launchers in particular feel like a missed opportunity with Kena's ability to shoot arrows and throw bombs. I mentioned earlier that Kena is essentially a modern take on older 3D Zelda titles, and this includes the combat. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are not known for zany strings of combo multipliers. A few quick strikes followed by shielding or dodging is the extent of those titles, and that's pretty close to what awaits someone here. There is a limited series of upgrades Kena can acquire by spending karma, which she receives by completing combat tasks or fighting hidden treasures. These upgrades will add several wrinkles to the tapestry of her arsenal and showcase all the ways rock can enhance existing moves. Putting that together with someone's playstyle can lead to interesting strategies, if one chooses to delve further. However, most of the time, none of the special moves or attacks are necessary for beating your enemies. Often, a slew of well-timed heavy strikes, which cause stumble, gets the job done. Even bosses will fall for this tactic if performed well. Speaking of bosses, it's time to bring up the difficulty spikes again. On my journey with Kena, I stumbled over almost every boss I encountered. Multiple attempts were needed to determine the optimal strategy I could execute. I thoroughly enjoyed these battles, as they pushed my abilities and knowledge of what Kena could do, but they honestly felt out of place with the relaxed pacing and very easy common fights scattered in the various regions. The boss designs, which I must affirm are great, clashed with everything else Kena Bridge of Spirits presented leading to them. I grew accustomed to these spikes the more I played, since I could mentally prepare for what I knew was coming, but it doesn't really excuse the sudden shift. Did I enjoy the bosses? Absolutely. Do I think they should be toned down? No, not at all. Instead, I think every other battle should be brought up to the same standard, and then players can raise or lower the overall difficulty accordingly. I suppose my main issue here is accessibility. I can definitely see younger players who love the Pixar or DreamWorks quality of presentation playing this game and becoming frustrated by these roadblocks. In fact, my 3-year-old son, who loved watching me play Kena, walked away to do something else whenever a boss fight started. Even he knew the progression of the story was about to screech to a halt. All that said, combat is a bit of a mixed bag. The pieces to create a great system filled with depth are there, but rarely does the game ask the player to use their full armory of moves and tactics. When it does ask more from the player, it does so at a level far higher than preceding encounters trained the player to expect. It's like spending a semester being taught multiplication tables only to receive the final exam and find a series of algebraic equations. Sure, the student might figure it out with enough time, but wouldn't it make more sense to prepare the student for the test? This game is clearly a stepping stone. Almost everything surrounding combat needs some tuning. Some areas need a small tweak, while others need an overhaul, and frankly, that's expected from a debut title. I know I just spent a decent amount of time dogging on the combat, but I stand by my statement from before. The combat is serviceable most of the time and pretty good in some battles. Nothing about it is bad, and as indifferent or degrading as saying something is serviceable may be, in my book, that means the system functioned properly and didn't cause major issues. I said the same thing about the systems in Yakuza Like a Dragon. Everything works, nothing disappoints, but very little impresses. If Ember Lab can push the envelope a little further in the sequel, all qualms I have could be erased. I encourage them to maintain and expand their boss battles while bringing some of those elements into more pedestrian clashes. Kena is not quite there when it comes to combat, but I don't see any reason it can't transform into something amazing with another go at it. Now, before I close up this chapter, I need to mention the cursed chests scattered around the valley of the mountain shrine. These chests represent combat challenges of varying degrees of difficulty. Most of these are about defeating enemies within a set time limit and will push players to develop the most efficient way to dispatch adversaries. I found all of these to be fantastic and well worth the time locating them. Some of these really bring out the very best in Kena's combat mechanics, not because an enemy proved difficult, rather because they made me think. Should I attack the weaker enemies first? Is it smarter to use a lined up charged arrow, or use the rot to spread the damage out evenly? The cursed chests were an excellent combination of puzzle and combat. That's not to say all of them were the best experience in the game, but a good chunk of them showed what the combat system could do. It's a shame not everyone will experience these since they are hidden. Okay, I think it's time to move on to one of my favorite aspects of the game: the story.
I sense suffering here, Spirit. Do you need help?
You know nothing of suffering. This is my home, my village. Turn back, Spirit Guide.
Before anyone clicks away because they don't want spoilers, let me preface this section of the video. I will start by describing my overall thoughts and feelings in a way that won't reveal plot points. This allows those of you who don't want spoilers to get an idea of the story and see if it's something you'd enjoy. I will then give a warning and timestamp to avoid spoilers. If you're still around at that point, we can start to delve into this intriguing world Ember Lab built. Everybody good? Cool, let's go. As I stated in my introduction, Kena Bridge of Spirits left me feeling introspective and reflective for a variety of reasons. There are essentially 4 main story arcs with their own characters and plot lines, but the big takeaway is these stories are personal. They are not grand-reaching tales of destiny, defying fate, or saving the world. Rather, each story is about the struggles of coping with difficult situations, making tough, irreversible choices, and learning to reconcile with those choices, even if they didn't go as planned. Every narrative is tightly knit to those involved, and this approach gives time for character motivations and decisions to unfurl like a blooming flower. Kena's role as spirit guide is to help troubled spirits move on from the world they once knew. How she accomplishes this, from a gameplay perspective, is gathering relics associated with the spirit and defeating a corrupted version of the spirit. From a narrative perspective, Kena unravels the anxieties, fears, doubts, regrets, and hatreds held from before death. I found all of the traumas examined relatable in some fashion, and perhaps that's why I connected with everything presented despite the compact scope, as the game can be completed in a weekend if desired. As a character, Kena's steadfastness and expertise in dealing with complicated matters she knows little about is admirable. She is a capable protagonist willing to adapt to customs she isn't familiar with, such as the death masks of the village, but more importantly, she is an excellent listener to both the humans trapped in between the physical and ethereal planes, and the land attempting to heal itself through natural cycles. She is quiet and treats elders and authority with respect, which reflects the Southeast Asian and Japanese influences prevalent throughout the game. Death and the afterlife are not easy subjects to broach. Different belief systems and customs can sometimes make the passing of a loved one even more difficult and taxing than it already is for those affected. Keeping this in mind, Kena Bridge of Spirits manages to sidestep these complications by concentrating on the emotions and struggles of the spirits themselves. These 4 stories are painted on a morose canvas of tragedy, which is apparent from the moment the player steps into the decaying village center. Once I realized the extent of the tragedy that befell this region, I felt some unease exploring the village and surrounding farmlands. It was like hearing the distant echo of someone shouting a warning, but time and distance warped the message into an incoherent sound of angst and fear. People formerly lived in the homes I now rummaged through. Their belongings still sat upon shelves, their treasured plots of land barren and sallow. I felt like an intruder of a sacred space, and to an extent, I was an intruder because I'm not a spirit guide. Kena is. As I played, a clear contrast between how I viewed story sequences and places and how Kena approached them as, for a lack of a better term, a professional, became more apparent. Her calming voice and demeanor worked on both the spirits and myself. After viewing some of the story cutscenes, I could feel a lump in my throat forming, as I know all too well what it is like to lose a loved one. In comparison, Kena spoke of forgiveness and understanding, of not letting mistakes or regrets get in the way of helping those in need. She seemed detached in a way most couldn't be, deeply empathetic despite intense emotional considerations. She doesn't lecture or offer much advice, but instead lures the spirit to a better realization of their circumstances and gently nudges them away from the harm they are causing. She wants the spirit to find their own path to deal with their inner turmoil. Kena speaks and acts towards spirits in a way that I'd honestly love to see replicated in the real world more often. This journey in helping the land and people recover is remarkable in its simplicity of plot and depth of impact. However, it won't be making you think long after completion like Returnal, or become heavily invested in its characters like Final Fantasy VII Remake or Yakuza Like a Dragon. I think anyone who has regrets or knows loss will make a connection. There's something here for most people, and that's an accomplishment all its own. While Kena is a breath of fresh air compared to the stagnant, try-hard anti-heroes of the last decade or so, and I'd love to keep talking about her, this is about as far as I can go without entering spoiler territory. I want to cover 2 more subjects relating to the story, but I can't really do so without using some specifics from the game. So, here's the spoiler warning. Please proceed to the chapter or timestamp displayed if you don't want to hear or see anything else regarding the story. So, the first part I want to discuss is the overarching allegory Kena Bridge of Spirits represents. I wouldn't say it's a stretch that the village's struggles reflect humanity's current struggles with Mother Nature. Pollution, climate change, extinctions, environmental refugees, these real-world issues slide easily into the stories of the village. In this universe, the land is periodically cleansed and restored by the rock god. That's right, those little furballs Kena collects are actually pieces of a god, and they are vital to maintaining balance in the land. Part of that balance sometimes involves wiping things to its base and regrowing. When the rock god begins this process, the crops of the village refuse to grow, diseases take hold of the people, death slides its sickly hands into the pockets of the living. But this is all a part of the process. New growth cannot occur without removing the old growth. When these calamities start taking their toll on the people, Toshi, the village's chief, decides to take a drastic measure: kill the rock god. Despite advice to lead his people to another area to settle and give the land time to heal, Toshi follows through with this plan. When the rock god is killed, a giant explosion emanating from the mountain shrine strikes down everyone still alive surrounding the village. It is a truly horrific act, and Toshi's storyline follows the aftermath of this decision. However, the allegory really takes hold in 2 of the other stories presented, Taro and Adira's. Taro is the elder brother of Benny and Saya, the 2 spirit children Kena meets very early in the game. When their parents die from illness, Taro decides to take his siblings to Rusu, a master hunter living high on the mountain. However, Rusu turns the children away, saying they'd be safer back in the village. Taro decides to set up camp in the woods for now, at least until he figures out what to do. While Taro is out looking for food and water, Toshi kills the rock god, which causes the explosion that kills Taro. His spirit wanders the forest looking for his two siblings, who he assumed died due to his neglect and poor decision-making. It is a very sad tale revolving around the guilt Taro feels, even though we know as the player, it's not his fault. What makes this story interesting is the parallels to environmental and economic refugees around the world. Taro decided to leave his village because of disease and lack of food. With the crops failing and no parents to look after him, he makes the bold decision to migrate to an area he thinks will better serve his family and offer protection. When he is rejected, he's placed into a no man's land of not reaching his goal but not being able to return to the awful situation he left. In the story, the rock god's death ends Taro's physical journey, but I think if the rock god didn't die, Taro and his two siblings probably wouldn't have survived anyway, and succumbed to a slow death of starvation or disease. It's not a pretty picture, and it isn't too far off the mark of what can happen to refugees in the real world. I'm not here to comment one way or the other what should happen in these circumstances. I'm neither qualified nor well-versed enough to form a competent opinion, but Taro's tale can be viewed as a cautionary one about helping those in need when the opportunity still exists. Like I said, I think Taro's family dies either way, but perhaps Russo could have escorted them to the village himself since they are just children, and Taro's spirit would be more at rest.
I should have done more to help Taro. And now I can only watch as his spirit struggles.
I would say the bigger point here is Taro comes from a circumstance he can't control. He has no power to influence what higher-ups do or what others, such as we'll see with Adira in a minute, decide to implement in his stead. He is merely a passenger in a car someone else is driving off a cliff. I don't know the right answer here, but Kena doesn't offer one either. It simply presents, and it is up to the player to decide what could have gone differently. Adira's story is more in line with industry and its relationship with nature. Now, Adira is the village's woodsmith, which means she is mechanically inclined and can build pretty much anything using the strength of wood. Now, she and Hana, her partner, develop a way to tap into the village heart, an artifact teeming with spirit energy. It enabled them to do incredible things, but as time progressed, the village heart faded. Shortly after, all the problems I mentioned earlier manifest. Crops fail, disease appears, poison blankets the land. Eventually, it becomes abundantly clear that nothing is going to fix these issues, and tapping into the village heart is only making things worse. As a last-ditch effort, Hana heads out to sea, hoping to bring back food and supplies for the village. She doesn't return. In her absence, Adira tries a multitude of solutions, including controlled burns of the land, to remove the poison and start from scratch. This fails too. Now, I'm not going to spoil the rest of this story because the main parts we need are what I've already described. Adira and Hana represent, not subtly, industry tapping into natural resources at a rate that nature cannot support. While the game doesn't explicitly state this, I believe they are responsible for the events leading to Toshi's decision to murder the rock god. Tapping into the village heart, while a boon at first, is the causation of everything to come. As the village heart weakened, the problems surrounding crops and disease increased, eventually leading to the rock god stepping in to restore balance when natural processes could not keep pace. I firmly believe that if Adira and Hana had been more conservative with the village heart, none of the events in this game would have transpired. Perhaps the cycle the rock god controls would happen in due time, but it might be slower and easier to adapt to. It is not a coincidence that the people living prior to Adira's era appeared to coexist for a long time near the mountain shrine, without tapping into the village heart. The overreach of the village led to their own downfall, and there are obvious parallels to the events of today coded here. Again, Kena Bridge of Spirits does not offer a solution. That isn't the point of an allegory. It merely reflects real events in a fictional form. It is easy to play this game without dealing with anything I've just mentioned, but I have to give Amber Lab credit for building a world that fosters this type of thinking. Okay, on to my last story topic, Kena's past. The story is very, very coy with Kena's past, so much so that almost nothing but questions get thrown at the player. Why do the veins in her hand glow? Why is her entire right arm covered? What happened to her father? How does a spirit guide get their power? What's the deal with her meeting her past self and taking a physical object from what appears to be the spirit realm? Does this mean Kena is dead? Is she a wandering spirit too? Is that how one becomes a spirit guide? Are the rot drawn to her because she's a spirit guide, or is it because she represents something else? All of this goes unanswered. And perhaps the biggest question of all, the impetus of our journey does not get resolved. In the beginning, she states she is trying to reach the mountain shrine, but we don't know why. At the end of the game, she reaches the mountain shrine, and the final shot is of her sitting down to meditate, something she's done a number of times throughout the game. What makes this session special? What was she searching for? Did she think the mountain shrine would connect her with her father? Again, no answers. The volume of questions is a little disconcerting. I understand a lot of these are there to tease the player to keep going or to look forward to the inevitable sequel, but I would have liked at least a few answers. It makes me wonder if Ember Lab actually planned everything out, or they set up mystery boxes like Control does with no intention of answering them unless forced to. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about how ambiguous the main character's arc is. There's very little growth for her, save for one encounter with Toshi towards the end of the game. I want more, but I don't think it's because Kena has a compelling arc. I want more because I'm essentially given nothing. That is not a good thing. She doesn't need a full arc, that's what sequels are for, but she needs way more than what we got. Here's to hoping Amber Lab delivers on many of these questions, and they continue building on the fascinating world they've established.
I can feel your true intent. You pretend to care for these spirits, but really, you only serve yourself. You cannot hide your weakness from me.
Earlier this year, I reviewed Yakuza Like a Dragon, and I likened it to meeting up with old friends in that, regardless of how my day or week went, the misfits of Yokohama provided a comfort, a steady emotional sink which momentarily allowed my stresses and worries to wash away. The connection I made with Kasuga in the game provided an anchor in much the same way a good book or TV show can sweep away half of your day without you even realizing it. Kena Bridge of Spirits is not Yakuza Like a Dragon. I think that's pretty obvious. But one thing these two seemingly disparate games have in common is the ability to relax my mind and allow a simple joy to seep into the cynical cracks the last few years have made in my brain. The characters definitely contribute to some of this. The rot are adorable. The spirits tell beautiful, heart-wrenching stories of acceptance in the face of tragedy and failure. Kena is likable and the antithesis of a lot of gaming's typical heroes. She's kind, respectful, and attentive to others. She can also throw down when pushed. Kena and her fellow castmates serve the journey well. But if I had to pick something with the most gravity, the aspect that pulled me back to the game over and over, it would be the world. Kena Bridge of Spirits is inviting. Vistas spread out begging for exploration. Gigantic trees filter rain and sunlight onto mossy patches and well-traveled trails. Destitute buildings spring to life with the delivery of a long-lost letter. A moonlit cherry blossom tree in the fog gives way to a clear water bay with sharp cliffs bordering its sides. Every turn or new region unveiled brought exciting expanses I wanted to run through. Even when I knew my time with Kena was nearing its end, I still wandered off just to look around or see if there were some shadowed nooks I missed. The village and surrounding regions are just as much a character as any person or spirit in the game. Amber Lab and its partners really nailed the environments and atmosphere, and Kena is worth playing just to run around in that. I predict Kena Bridge of Spirits will be on many Game of the Year lists. It doesn't quite reach that height with me because of the issues I've discussed throughout this review, but I can easily recommend it to anyone who played old hat Zelda titles or those looking for a sometimes challenging yet comforting romp through a gorgeous landscape. It is a special case of the parts equaling more than their sum. When my son exclaimed,
"What a beautiful day."
after seeing the title crawl, I knew we were in for a treat. And that intuition proved right. I highly recommend Kena Bridge of Spirits. Have yourself a good one.